action. Hello, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, coming to you from the Rogue River in Southern Oregon with the Walter Russell Secret of Light group, where we discuss all things related to matter, manifestation, and the wave through light on this earth and in all realms. Today, we're going to be talking about treatise on white magic. This is, I think, the fourth that we're doing on this topic in the 4 weeks. And we're going to be discussing quite a few items, as we talked about before. Alice Bailey is from the same kind of school as Steiner, in terms that she started with theosophy and then broke away at the death of Madame Blavatsky, and kind of had some outs with the Ledbetter and Annie Besant group, and when they tried to insert Krishnamurti as the world teacher. And she began her own thing and began to develop some of Blavatsky's ideas in greater detail and began to speak on these. Also, she formed the Lucis Trust, which has quite a reputation as not being quite on par with most Christian beliefs, and can actually be associated with some of the Luciferic actions just because of the name. I really haven't found it that much in the writings, but we haven't finished the book yet either. So what we're going to talk about, though, is the reason that we're looking at this is that oftentimes it's said that people talk about the actual what's going on. They talk about the why, but they don't say the how. And in this book, she actually goes into some detail in how to create white magic, what white magic is, and we've covered those topics in the previous. We'll discuss that a little bit more today. But as we move on, we have covered Rule 1 already, and now we're on Rule 2. And as we move into this material, as I say, I always kind of make a collage of what we're going to discuss today, so people can get kind of an idea and kind of set the stage to see what we're going to talk about and to begin to visualize, because visualization is a big part of learning. As we visualize, we can actually begin to adhere concepts to those visualizations and actually begin to form those in our mind. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today also, about how thought forms go into reality, just as Walter Russell talked about how we create reality and how that's done. He never really talked much about how it's done. He showed the physical process, he showed the physics of it, but he didn't really show the mental attributes to how to make that happen. And today we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's go ahead and look at the collage that I put forth. This is a treatise on white magic. We're going to talk about Rule 2 and 3, the Kundalini fire, the heart-brain coherence, and the sacred word. And these all come together to form and to begin to create those thought forms that we talked about and to bring in that energy. So if we look here at the, say in the center right here, we have the spine going up to the brain. So what we're seeing here is kind of how this Kundalini fire that we discussed goes up through the spine and to the brain and can explode out into this, energy that is brought forth from the lower parts of our body, in which we're going to talk about some of the rules. Now, this idea of bringing in this energy and moving energy up the spine and into the brain, you can actually do this. I mean, I do it quite a bit when I meditate using the techniques of Mantek Chia, C-H-I-A, in which you actually kind of, flex your sphincter muscle and begin to push the energy up your spine. And you can actually feel the energy move up your spine as you do that. And then if you do it enough, you can actually kind of make your back become, it's almost like a chiropractic sensation, that you begin to loosen the muscles in your back and in your shoulders and in your neck. And I can actually get it to where I feel this rush of energy to my head. Now, this is something that has been talked about for a long time, because this is like the Vedic traditions of this Kundalini fire. But today, this is actually being discussed, in the mainstream, on Gaia TV and so on, by the three fellows down here that you may see, which is this is Braden. He's very big on Tibetan history and finding things in Tibet. He worked for the Atomic Agency, I believe, and I think he also worked for NASA. But he is very big on the HeartMath Institute. If anybody knows what the HeartMath Institute is, but it's where you actually have a device that hooks to your earlobe, and then to a computer program, and you practice meditation. And this will show, it will beep when your brain and your heart are in coherence. And so you can practice putting your heart and your brain into coherence, and you do that through emotion. So you emote, you clear your brain, you breathe, and you think about love or gratitude or some other thought, and you begin to bring your heart and your brain into coherence, because at that state is when you're in the most calm and appeasing state. So that's Greg Braden. The next to him is, Bruce Lipton, who is kind of the father of epigenetics right now. He talks about how all these other influences in our genome actually affect who we are and who we are becoming. That the genes are not the rulers of our destiny, but they are the blueprint of our destiny. And through our external and our own mind, we can actually affect what our genes and our genetics do. So through our power of our thinking, through the power of our motivation, we can actually begin to change. And he actually did this with Petri dishes. And, he's actually a doctor, Dr. Bruce Lipton. He actually was very on the forefront of genetics, where he began to do these experiments with the mind and with genetics. So he coined the term epigenetics, which actually is this larger view of genetics, which has, historical content from our parents, and so on, and our external factors of our environment. And again, these are the things that Bailey talks about. But again, Bailey didn't create these concepts. She got them from the Vedic traditions, from India, from yoga, from all these other systems, in which they actually looked at the cosmos, the day you were born. There's another book called The Gene Keys that is very popular today, that is looking at the same type of things. On the day you were born, what energies were in place that were going to create the person that you are today, because all of these energies have an effect and an influence on who we are. As I said, that's what Bruce Lipton is talking about today. Then we have Joe Dispenza. Joe Dispenza got in a bicycle accident where he actually broke his back and was told he was paralyzed and would never be able to walk again or do anything again. And through his envisioning his nerves and his spine and other things being corrected and cured, he says that he cured his body this way. He now can walk and run and talk and move, and actually cured spinal injuries this way. So these three people today are very much along the same lines as what Bailey was discussing in the 1920s, but she covered it from a different kind of view, in which she was looking at more of the Vedic traditions, like I said, like the Eastern traditions. These three men are all doctors, different doctors. I mean, Braden's a doctor of science, I think, not of medicine. I think Dispenza may be a medical doctor. I know Lipton is. But today, these are men that are actually taking the work and actually putting this much more, science, as the title says here, where science merges with spirit. And Bailey talks a lot about the spirit, but she also talks about the science that is needed. Oftentimes it's said in these writings that, this mysticism is going to become the new science. This idea of spirit behind everything is going to become the new science. And this is where we're going to have, as we go into this new, some people would call it a reset. I like to call it a renaissance. This new renaissance of thinking and of lifestyle is going to be based on a spirit-based concept, not just a physics-based, but we're going to begin to combine the two, just as Rudolf Steiner talked about in his anthroposophy, or science and spiritual science, as he called it. So these three guys. We're going to talk a little bit about, not so much about what they do, but kind of correlate the things that they are discussing today. We see a picture here of a Buddha sitting down with the Kundalinis, the two snakes, going up the spinal cord here within the Kundalini fire. We also have a picture here of the monad, which is like the essence of God, the highest ideal of the one essence.
Which picture is that?
This one here at the top, in the upper corner. You see that? Then below that, we have a picture of the body, showing the different chakras of the body with the different lower and mid, because we're going to talk a little bit about these chakras. So I kind of want you guys to see where so these are the lower chakras here. This is the sacral chakra. These are the lower three. These are the upper three, and this is the crown chakra. Then this is the idea of, we're going to discuss this a little bit about the Pingala, which is the mother matter intelligence. This line right here going down the center is supposedly the spine. So this is kind of an idea that you have this Shushana, the father monad. So this would be like the monad right here, the will. And then we have the Pingala, which is the mother. And then we have the Ida, which is the son or soul. So, and this is love and wisdom. So we have the soul, which is love and wisdom. So this is in Vedic tradition, but it is very closely related to the Christian, cosmology of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, which they put as mother here. So the mother is matter and intelligence. The father is the monad, which is will, and the son is soul, love, and wisdom. So we have the soul, the will, and the intelligence or matter. So this is the earthly plane. So this, we're going to talk a little bit about this. We get into the Shushuna. And so I want you to have a picture of that. Over here, what we have, this is the sacred word, or this is a symbol for the sacred word over here in the lower right corner, which is the Om. The Om that the monks chant. This is a symbol for that. So this is kind of a picture of the Om going over the waters, which is kind of spoken about within the Christian Bible of creation, of how the monad went over the waters to start creation. And so then we're going to talk about rule 2 and rule 3 as we get into those. So those are the topics we're going to talk about today. Any comments before we move on to continuing? Yes, Doug, you have a question?
What's what's the guy with the showing the red skull and blowing? What was that?
Oh, here right here?
Yeah.
Oh, right here.
Yeah, in the middle, right.
Okay, so this is the idea when I was talking about, you can call it chi or prana, but the Kundalini fire. So the idea is that we can garner this energy from this area here, which is at the base of the spine. So this area down here in the lower left-hand corner, we talked about this Pingala, this Shushana, and this Ida, are actually at the base down here of the spine. And by acting on that, we can actually push this Kundalini fire up into our brain, and then we can actually become illuminated as a being. So this is a practice where you hear about the Kundalini or the Kundalini fire that actually comes from the Vedic tradition, that actually begins down here in the lower area of this area, the Shushana, father, monad, and this area. And we're going to talk about that as we move on. Okay, go ahead.
One last comment. The Dispenza guy.
Yeah.
That he was, told that he would never walk again.
Mm-hmm.
You should say he was told by the allopathic madmen. So
yeah,
really has little value.
Yeah, but again, he was a doctor at the time, and he thought he wouldn't.
Right. Good point.
And so he was in that world, right? It really depends on what our realities are when we look at all these things, because we can put ourselves in different realities, right? And that reality will become our control. And so in order to break out of those realities, we actually have to open our minds a little bit more and begin to research and look at other ideas. And he did. And from that, he grew, and now he has a very successful business teaching others how to use the concepts that he created. Any more comments before we move on? All right. So we left off last week on these introductory remarks, and we're kind of just, we were talking about the soul and the mediator, just to kind of review the idea of rule 1 that we talked about, was that within Bailey's cosmology, she has the idea of the solar angel, which is the mediator between the monad, which is the highest source, which Walter Russell would call source or God or whatever you want to call it, and our higher self, which is our self prior to incarnation on earth. So it doesn't have any of the baggage or trauma or, what we call in the Christian Bible, the fall of man. As man fell into matter, he picked up a bunch of junk, right? He picked up a bunch of feelings of all these other things that the mind, he picked up a electric mind, which can cause issues. He picked up a lot of other things that when we're in the higher self, in the solar angel self, we don't really experience. And that is the mediator. That's the part of us that is outside of this physical body, that is in the gap between the monad and man, that could be called the Christ consciousness. Oftentimes in Christianity, they say that, Christ is in the gap, right? So that gap between this immense, intellect and knowledge and idea that we can't comprehend, that's where our higher self stays, and they call it the solar angel. So there is the first of all what might be called the spiritual will, that quota of the universal will, which any one soul can express, and which is adequate for the purpose of enabling the spiritual man to cooperate in the plan and purpose of the great life in which he has his being. So what Walter Russell was saying is that all men, their desire is to seek God. And with this, that's the higher purpose. So, oftentimes we've talked about that animals have souls and men have souls and plants have souls. Everything has souls, but man is one of the only, is the only being that actually contemplates, why am I here? The dog doesn't say, why am I here? The cat doesn't say, they're just here. They're just living in the moment. For us, we believe there's a higher purpose. And the idea is that for us to connect with that higher purpose through the solar angel to the monad is what this man on earth is trying to find and express here. And so, there is also a second soul quality, which is spiritual love. The quality of group consciousness, of inclusiveness, of mediatorship, of attraction, and of unification. This is the paramount soul characteristic, for only the soul has it as the dynamic factor. The spirit or monad is primarily the expression of will with love and intelligence as secondary principles, and the body nature, the personality, is paramountly distinguished by intelligence. So what we're saying here is we're beginning to separate out that there is two of us. Each person has two identities. And this is what Walter Russell said also, is that we have this higher self, right? This solar angel, as we can call it, that is between us and the monad, or God. And then there's the physical man, which is our shadow, which is what we cast upon the earth, which is our energy bodies that are sheathed in elements of food and different minerals and things like that that we eat. So
what do they call shadow? Like you have to work on your shadow. What do they mean by that?
Well, again, there's two different ideas of shadow. There's probably more than that, but I'll cover two. So right now, in this scenario that we're talking about, and I think it's probably the oldest scenario, is that we cast the shadow on the earth. So the shadow that our solar angel casts is who you see right now sitting before you as Will, right? As William. This is my shadow. This is not me. My solar angel is me. So, as you were discussing today, kind of about, how the person you want to be, your heartfelt person is not who you always are. And there's a little, badass, I think you said, running around on the earth. That little badass is the shadow. That person you want to be is the monad. Okay.
Lower self.
Yeah. So what Bailey's trying to teach us here or show us is that we can connect that higher self, that person that we want to be, right? That we are in our heart, that we are in our love, that we are in, our being. We can reflect that shadow on the earth versus the shadow that we're reflecting. But in order to do that, we have to connect that soul, right? Through spirit, through the monad, and then back into the flesh. So we have to actually begin to have a better relationship between this shadow that we're calling the body, the man, the matter, and this soul, which is outside, but is the standing in the gap between God and ourselves. So the idea to bring that soul, to actually embody that soul down into the physical, is the key. Right now, that soul is outside of us. That's the way we experience that soul's outside of us. And that's oftentimes what's talked about even in Christianity, is that the soul is kind of an exterior element, but they don't really teach us how to bring it into the body. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today in White Magic, is how to bring that soul into the essence of the body, and to actually begin to have this group consciousness, this group love, and so on. And these are all the methods in which she talks about that we can use in order to actually bring that soul and incarnate it in the body. Now, the second item that we talked about was a shadow, which is what Jung talked about. And what Jung talked about, he didn't really have quite the idea of the solar angel being the soul. And he's actually saying there's actually two like personality types. And the shadow is the personality type that we don't acknowledge. So it's the kind of thing that, I may look at dirty magazines over here, but I'm never going to tell anybody. I may smoke, cigarettes in the closet, but I'm not going to tell anybody, And that's kind of my shadow side. It can go deeper into things about me, right? And my thoughts and my traumas that I've never acknowledged or dealt with, that I kind of keep hidden because I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of what's going to happen if I actually let that out, right? That's my shadow side. And, as you guys were discussing in the chat, the idea is that you don't ignore the shadow side. You acknowledge it. You acknowledge what parts of it you don't want to enact, right, in the physical. But you actually understand it and let it go and let it understand it, and not be like ashamed of it. It's not like, oh, that's my sin nature. I got to go whip myself 30 times to get rid of that. You just acknowledge it and let it go. But the only way that we can actually do that, right? I mean, I don't know if Jung kind of did it through what he called depth psychology. Bailey's saying that we can do it through connecting with our soul, and actually to find the soul and to connect with that through meditation is really the key. That answer your question, Doug? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So we talk about this, that we have intelligence and we have the expression of love and so on. And so Bailey actually breaks it down into these aspects, where she calls it, so you can see here, the monad, the will, and the purpose, right? So the first aspect is that we have will, enabling the monad to participate in the universal purpose. So our will is allowing, right? This is kind of like in AA, I think, when they say, I have I forget what they say. It's like, I'm not God, basically. Though there is a God and I'm not him, and I give myself over to a higher purpose, right? So they're giving themselves over and they're allowing God to work in their life, or spirit or whatever. And they're actually realizing that there may be a divine purpose that is actually working in the universe, and that's called the universal purpose. The second aspect is that love, the energy which is poured forth into the soul, making it what it is. So we understand that there is a concept of love. Now, love is a very difficult concept to, we've talked about that before. I think Grant and I had a conversation a few weeks ago, because there's many different forms of love. There's many different ideas of love. We talked about, there's erotic love, there's brotherly love, there's agape love, there's all these different forms of love. And so when we talk about love, the energy which is poured forth into the soul, making it what it is, we really have to define love, because so many people have it different. And I'm not going to try to define it right now. I'm just saying that for each person, that may need to be looked at upon what love means to them. The third aspect is intelligence, transmitted via the soul and brought into manifestation through the medium of the body. So what they're saying here is that the soul is what gives the body intelligence. And intelligence is different than knowledge. Intelligence is actually a function of taking knowledge, putting it against a metric of some sort to produce an answer. Because knowledge on itself produces no answer, produces no judgment, produces no conclusions. It's the intelligence that comes through that produces the answers. If you just throw a bunch of, it'd be like having a hard drive by itself. It's just a bunch of information. It has no decision-making proper, capabilities. You can't garner any decisions from that data. You have to put an algorithm on it to actually, put some parameters as to how to make the decision. That's why it's called artificial intelligence, because that algorithm is actually putting in that intelligence to make a decision from the data. That's what our soul does. Our soul is that algorithm that takes the data and can make the decisions when we use love and intelligence. So that is transmitted through the soul and brought into manifestation in the body in the 3D world. So then we have the soul, love, and the method. So the first aspect is will, held in abeyance by expressing itself through the mind aspect of the personality through Kundalini, as we talked about in those slides, Doug, that we talked about. We asked the idea, which when aroused correctly makes possible the final initiation into the consciousness of the monad. So if you guys remember the slide that we looked at last, right? That as we had this Kundalini running up, right? Both these pictures here, that this is what allows, within Bailey's cosmology, humans to actually express with the monad, initiation of the consciousness of the monad. So by sparking this Kundalini fire, this is it's not just that you sit down, right, and you think, or you be quiet, or you be still. This is a little bit different than I think we talked a little bit about Russell, and there was a movement in England called the Quietists, where they just wanted to sit and be quiet, and that's how they communed with God. And it was a big departure from the Catholic Church, which wanted you to put up prayers all the time and kind of have a busy mind all the time. And the Catholic Church denounced the Quietists and said that they were evil because they weren't, doing what the Catholic Church said. And they put out an edict, a papal bull against them. And so what this is saying is that we actually need more than just being a quietist, just sitting in quietness, is that we actually need to try to develop this Kundalini, this Kundalini fire. And that really is through a meditative practice that has parameters and is actually, more assertive in its practice than just sitting. So love, the dominating force of the soul life through the possession and this type of energy, the soul can be in rapport with all souls. So this gets back to, through this love, the dominating, so through our soul, we can actually be in contact with what we call the group consciousness, is what Jung called it, right? The group unconsciousness, if you want to call it that. But there is a consciousness of all these souls, not just souls of other humans, but souls of all sentient beings. So even like, say, with the planets, with animals, with plants, with all type of beings, we can actually begin to connect with their souls through this Kundalini. And this is through the emotional body. The soul could be in touch with all animals or subhuman souls through its work on its own plane, with the mediating souls of all men, and through the principle of Buddhi with the second aspect of the monad. So what this is saying is that we can actually begin to communicate, begin to, have relationships with people within the soul side of us through this Kundalini. That is not just a physical, speaking and talking and touching, but we can actually begin to have this soul consciousness with other people, in which we begin to actually communicate in this realm of the etheric plane. The third aspect is knowledge. This aspect is brought into touch with the intelligence of all cells in the threefold body mechanism. So as you can remember, in some of the first things that we talked about, that our whole body is made up of cells, is made up of atoms, but this knowledge can be brought into an effect, just as Joe Dispenza talked about, right? This is what Joe Dispenza talked about. He didn't call it Kundalini. He's just saying mind, that he brought his mind, his efforts, but it affected the cells in the threefold body. So this is when I showed Joe Dispenza earlier, and even Greg Braden says, you know, you can cure yourself this way, that this is being done in places where they see it as already being done. So instead of saying, you know, please cure me, a prayer, you know, please heal me, you know, the idea is you are healed. I am healed. I am healed. I am happy and I'm whole, or whatever you want to say. But in these affirmations, you're actually visualizing it as being done now. So what that's taking is taking the source, going through this aspect, because when you do this, you emote love or compassion or something, and this is what Braden says, this is what HeartMath says, and then through that it can actually become into reality. So some of the things that Bailey talked about in the 20s are actually being done today in a slightly different manner, not in a Vedic tradition, but in a more scientific Western tradition. But they are the same context of what is being done here. So by a close study of the above, it becomes apparent in what way the soul acts as the mediator between the monad and the personality. So the personality is, again, the shadow that we talk about. It's the thing that's here on earth, that's running around. The personality hides within itself as a casket hides the jewel, the point of soul light, which we call the light in the head. This is found within the brain and is only discovered and later used when the highest aspect of the personality, the mind, is developed and functioning. Then the union with the soul is made and the soul functions through the lower personal nature. So, you know, Walter Russell talked about this too. He said there's electric thinking, and then there's knowing, and there's the mind. And the mistake that humans make is that they think the thinking mind, the electric mind, is the mind. I mean, I think the electric thinking is the mind. It's not the mind. It's just the electric brain. So what that's doing is and this is where, you know, scientific materialism takes off. It says, you know, all there is this electric mind. You are just an animal, right? There is no soul. And therefore, all decisions you make are made solely on your senses, on what you see, feel, taste, touch, weigh, measure, you know, whatever that is, whatever your senses can pick up, that is what, or whatever, even electric sensors. I mean, this is where we get into the whole idea of electric gadgets that are meters, right? Which are just another electric devices. So all they're going to register is electric impulses. But then we'll take that as knowledge. We'll take an electric device as knowledge. I pull out my pendulums and are doing stuff with the ether and etheric. That's not knowledge. I mean, that's not dependable, right? Because it's not an electric device that can do these things that can, or, you know, some other pressure device or whatever I have that's actually measuring some physical property that is measurable. So we have to get back to the soul and get out of the thinking mind and get back into the intelligence and connect this soul with our mind and bring that down in the body. And then once that connection is made, we will behave much differently in the physical realm because we will be connected to the monad or source, or that knowing that Walter Russell talked about. So the soul hides within itself the jewel in the lotus. Oftentimes that area that we talked about down at the base of the spine is called the lotus flower. That faculty of dynamic energy, which is the manifest attribute of the monad, the will. So, you know, how can we align our will with that will of God, right? With the will of the source within this higher self. That's what we're going to talk about next. Any questions so far about these aspects that we just went over and the idea of bringing the soul down into manifest within the body?
I think I think when we're more aligned and we learn how to, you know, do this, then we can impress our mind, our brain with, well, I guess, better actions, if you like, or actions that will bring us forward, you know, and we'll also be able to, you know, transmit that love, I guess, that we would like to show, or the will, for that matter, so that we actually do something. Yeah. So we're not become just like a quietist person. We actually do something with it. Practical mystic here.
Well, this is not true, though. I mean, that's what they want to take away. They want us to be a hive, one hive mind. Without
Well,
what they want doesn't mean they're getting it. I mean,
Mhm.
just for me anyway.
All right, so now we're going to look at rule 2. So rule 1 talked about how the solar angel, looked down upon the mirror, right? So in rule 2, we're going to talk about when the shadow hath responded in meditation deep, the work proceedeth. The lower light is thrown upward, the greater light illuminates the 3, and the work of the 4 proceedeth. So again, when the shadow hath responded, so the idea is that in meditation, we actually see the solar angel. We actually see this higher self of ours, right? We can actually visualize that. We can visualize, that being, which we all do. We all know that there is, a better self than what we project daily, right? I think for the most part. And that once we actually begin to realize that this better self, or higher self, if you want to call it, is a separate being that needs to be integrated. I wouldn't say being a separate aspect of ourselves, right? That needs to be integrated. Then we can look down upon the physical man, which some people call, the meat suit or whatever that's running around here. I call it, like the probe, right? It's the probe that we send down. That once we can integrate the soul into that, then it can be illuminated, and the work can proceed with the spirit being the fourth of that, the fourth of the triad. So once we begin to bring in the spirit, which connects the soul and the body together, right? The soul connects the spirit and the body together. So the spirit is that force that is coming forth, then it can proceed us forward. So as we look down on this shadow, the shadow responds, the man responds. He says, yes, I do want to have this connection with the soul, with the monad. But he has to acknowledge that he wants that to happen, right? If he doesn't, he's just going to be an automaton. He's just going to be a guy walking around, living by his instincts, basically being an animal. That's really what he's going to be, because he is not connected with his higher soul or his higher purpose. He hasn't connected with any source, and he doesn't believe in that. And he just wants to be a creature of his desires. So once the soul sees that and responds back, it can begin to work and begin to manifest the soul into the physical man. Any questions on that before we proceed? We are going to discuss this some more in greater detail. So rule 2, in considering the second rule, we must note that a conscious relation has been established between the soul and its shadow. So that's what I was talking about. When the shadow responds, right? So we have this conscious relationship, the man on the physical plane. Both have been meditating. So the man has been meditating, and the soul has been meditating. Students would do well to note this and to remember that one of the objectives of the daily meditation is to enable the brain and mind to vibrate in unison with the soul as it seeks in meditation deep to communicate with its reflection. So again, its reflection is the shadow, the soul's shadow, so on. And again, this gets back to the idea that we talked about at the beginning of the clause, which is the HeartMath that we talked about, in which as you bring so from the HeartMath website, it says, as you bring your physical, mental, emotional systems into coherent alignment, you begin to experience increased access to your heart's intuitive guidance. So this again is taking what Bailey was talking about in 1920 and adding new words to it, right? Adding new definitions, scientific definitions to a Vedic tradition. We're talking about souls have to vibrate in unison. What's the new word for vibrate in unison? Coherence, right? That's just a different word for the same thing, right? But it's a single word for the description of vibrate in unison, right? And what's gonna happen? You're experiencing increased access to your heart's intuitive guidance, right? Which we'd say into your soul's or the monadic guidance, right? So, they're what they're doing, they're kind of stripping away any of the, cosmology of God or angels or other beings. And they're just saying, because that's all that they really, because, some people said this is what happened with Christianity, was it was so complicated that they actually wanted to bring it to more people. So they kind of just, kept cutting away at it and making it very simple to where, but once they got it to such a simplicity, it lost all of its depth, because some people have to do the work to get to the where they want to be. No pain, no gain type of situation, right? I mean, we have to actually put in some effort to get to where it is we want to be. And not everything is easy, right? Not everything is simple. Even though we'd like it to be, it usually is not. So the correspondence to this relation or synchronizing vibration is interesting. So we're already talking about the synchronization, that the soul is man on the physical plane, the mind is in the brain, and the pineal gland and the pituitary body. So I think if you guys remember how we looked at, the pineal gland and pituitary gland and things in the body, how that was the vibrationary force that was happening, that may actually be this, thing that's bringing in source into the soul. So that could be where the spirit's coming in. The relation also between the sinners and their synchronization is interesting, and it is epitomized the evolution of the race as well as the racial unit man. So we have the head is the head center is the base of the spine, the heart center is the solar plexus, and the throat center is the sacral center. So within that, as you see here, we're calling the throat center the sacral center, the solar plexus, and the base of the spine. So let's go, and that's the head center, the heart center, and the throat center. So what we're saying here is, you go back to this first one here, right? These are the chakras that we're talking about as these centers, right? The base, the sacral, and the solar plexus. So any questions on that, on in regard to this idea of this correspondence with the heart and the brain, allowing us to have this better intuitive guidance to the monad? All right. This is rule 2 continued. The result of this response is a reorientation of the lower man in order to produce a synthesis of the 3 and the 1, so that the work of the 4 may proceed. Here you have the reflection consummated in the microcosm of that which the solar logo started, the sacred 4, or the cosmos. Man in his turn becomes the sacred 4, spirit, and the 3 manifestations. So, these lower 3 chakras are really kind of what are the embodiment of man, physical man. These are like what we call the animal chakras, the kind of the reproductive, the root, and so on. As these chakras intertwine with spirit, this is the sacred 4. So this is, as the cosmos, as man is a microcosm, which means a smaller version of the macrocosm, which is the cosmos. All are the same, as above, so below. Our cell is a microcosm of us as a macrocosm. The atom is a microcosm of the cell, right? We can go through this whole thing. The structure is all the same. This is what Walter Russell talked about in his diagrams, was that all things are made of the same stuff in a different matter. They are just brought together, as we talked about last week. Our vibration, our soul, brings all these energies together to form our form, which this form is the archetype of form. And we bring it together. So each person, we've chosen how we look, how we are, how we be, through the energetics that we have. And we can change our appearance. I mean, this is something that actually Gurdjieff talks about, that he can actually be a shapeshifter, that we can actually change how we look by our consciousness. Because we, again, if what Bailey's saying is true, right? I'm not saying that, I'm just quoting other people and what they say, is that our consciousness can change our vibrationary structure, can change our energy structure. So think about it like, again, anybody who likes Star Trek or any of those type of movies where you have these force fields and, you know, the holodeck and all that kind of stuff. It's really just matter and light, right? That they are shaping it. And what is shaping the holodeck and Star Trek? It's the program. It's the algorithm of the program on the holodeck. Well, what's the algorithm of the program of us? It's our mind, right? It's our being. It's our consciousness. So through, what's that, Doug?
I thought I lost my connection.
Okay. So, you know, through these ideas, our mind's very powerful. That's what Joe Dispenza talks about, right? That's what he's talking about. That's what, you know, all those three fellows talk about. And we're beginning to see that more today. But where they just talk about that it works, that they're saying it does work, that your mind's a powerful thing. They're not really saying where the source of that power comes from. And that's really the difference. And some people want to take that and make a religion out of it, you know. Some will just want to acknowledge this and say that's the way it is, and each person can have their own individual religion. I don't, you know, I don't have a religious practice for this. I have a sacred practice for it. Maybe I see it as sacred, but I don't see it as a religious practice. So the 4 words should be pondered upon here: communication, response, reorientation, and union. So I think that we talked about this a bit where you talked last week, I think, about everything being information, right? So information or communication, right? We're having communication of information. But once we receive that information, what do we do with it? We have to have a response, right? This is the intelligence. We have to have a response to the communication. And then we need maybe a reorientation. We need to refocus on what our response is and begin to look at it in maybe a different way or a different style or a different method. And then we have to become in union with it. So these are the 4 ideas, the 4 areas that we're going to look at here. So the relation between the soul and the personality, this will be handled particularly with reference to the meditation of the daily life, more than the theoretical and the academical. So when we talk about this relation between the soul and the personality, it's very important that we actually form relationship, right? It's very hard to have relationship with somebody who you never speak to, or you never visit, or you never spend time with. So if we're not in meditation with our soul, are we going to have relationship with our soul? I would say probably not, right? So if we actually make a conscious effort, right, to have a meditation practice, and it doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be lengthy, but you know, probably the more dedicated you are to it, the greater relationship you may have, just with any relationship. If you know, have a girlfriend or whatever, and I'll see you when I see you type thing, it may not go anywhere. You know, you may not have children together, or you may, but you might be divorced, you know. So the idea that we need to spend some time in meditation deep in this reflection is to form this relationship between the soul and the man on the earth. The significance of the words, the lower light is thrown upward, as we talked about in the rule. This deals with the centers and the Kundalini fire. So we talked about that all this starts down here at the base chakra, right? At the base of the spine. That light that's generated down there is thrown up through the spine, up through the head. And this is the fire that's being thrown forth through the Kundalini fire. And then Kundalini refers to a cosmic force and an energy unlike any other energy that we know physically. Kundalini is not mere electric or magnetic or heat, but is the source of them all. So when we think about Kundalini, it's the prima, you know, materia, you know, it's the thing that is the source of all energy. So as we begin to form this Kundalini, right, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling, you know, sluggish, you get coffee, right? Do you get, you know, these other things, or do you try to develop this Kundalini fire, right? Can you develop this Kundalini? I mean, can you if you're feeling tired, can you go into meditation, right, and revive yourself? Can you bring in this Kundalini fire? Can you bring in things that are going to change how you are? Do you have to take medicine? You got to take drugs. You have to do it chemically, right? You have to do it through chemistry, or can you do it through spiritual methods? This is the new science, right? This is going to be the new science of where we go from chemical and allopathic to spiritual and energetic, right? This is, I think, this renaissance that we're going to have. I'm not going to call it a reset, because it's really a renaissance, because we are, the things that we're going to do coming forward are going to be a combination of Bailey and Lipton and Braden. We're going to include the things that have now been discovered and are going to move forward even to a greater height than what was talked about in these practices that may have been forgotten or hidden or whatever. Okay, any questions on rule 2 before we move on to rule 3, or comments?
Well, it said, you're saying that it's something that you learn along the way?
What Kundalini?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other,
Yeah, the idea is that through the meditational practices, that's what we're learning here. So as I've expressed before, is that oftentimes it will talk about the why, that you're sick, or you need to do this, or you need to do that, but they don't tell you how to do it. It's like I said, like Russell was talking a lot about the knowing and about connecting, and that he did his art, because he got into the knowing, and when he would sculpt things, it wasn't he that was doing it, it was the source that was doing it, or God, or whatever. But how to actually get into that meditative state, how to get into that practice is not really talked much about. And that's what Bailey talks about in this book. So her idea that white magic, right, is the idea of manifesting. And how do you manifest? And the first thing that she's putting forth here is that you do it by developing the Kundalini fire, which you do in meditation, by connecting the soul with the body.
When you're in alignment, or, well, when you get those quiet moments, I find that later on, I seem to be able to do more. It gives me more energy, more will anyway, to do things. Or sometimes it just calms yourself, like depending what it is that you need, because it all depends what day you've had, or, and I haven't got that much experience yet, but you start, it talks about the lower light is thrown upward. Well, when it joins with the light up above, you start eventually to see like a faint light up there, and if it doesn't always happen, but I'm just saying it's or it's a feeling of expansion. I don't know, it's just that feeling that you feel bigger than you are in this body. Okay. Well, you're there, you feel it's like a calm place, and also you're expanded. It's well, it feeds you, kind of thing. It really does.
Yeah, and for people who are maybe experience loneliness, once you get into this and you actually experience the solar angel, right, your soul, and then you experience the monad, and then you experience the soul consciousness, you're not alone. There is no loneliness anymore. I mean, you know that there is more. And to me, that's a very big thing, especially in today's world, as we get separated from physical contact, that that we can actually experience soul consciousness and this solar angel and this monadic consciousness, because we can communicate and we can form relationships and we can do other things in a different plane than the physical, which is, I think, going to be required in this Renaissance. This is the new way of actually experiencing life, not just in a 3D physical form. Any more comments before we move on? All right. Which time is it? We got time. Rule 3. Okay, so the energy circulates. The point of light, the product of the labors of the four, waxeth and groweth. The myriads gather round its glowing warmth until its light recedes. Its fire grows dim. Then shall the second sound go forth. Any comments on this rule before we actually get into it? We've talked a bit about it.
And then it's 3.
This is 3.
But what does it say 4 on the top?
Rule 3. I see rule 3. I don't see rule 4.
Oh, I'm sorry, it says 004. Is what I
Okay,
meant.
yeah.
It could be from chapter 4.
No,
Never.
this is the 4th in the series.
Oh, the 4th of the series. Okay.
So we're talking about the energy circulating. We're talking about the light. You know, these are the kind of concepts that we've talked about going forward here. And so as this energy circulates, the point of life, the product of the labors of the 4 waxeth and groweth. So waxeth means it's like when you apply layers of wax, it begins. So these layers that we're applying, right, are beginning to grow. And the myriads gather around its glowing warmth until its light recedes. So it grows up and the light recedes as we become quiet, right? As we become still. As the stillness, and as the stillness comes on us, this is the quietest talked about. Then shall the second sound go forth.
I think that second sound, it's the vibration that it's when it aligns, when we're aligned.
Mhm.
The sound, if you like, from the soul
Mhm.
can actually send us the sound that will make us aligned.
Mhm.
That's what I see.
Is it like the trumpets that they're always talking about?
be.
It's more like, yeah, it's kind of, it can be. I mean, it can be different from a lot of people, right? It can also be, you know, whatever, how God speaks to you, but it can also be some things called the sacred word. And we're going to talk about that a bit.
Mm.
I thought it was like, though, that these sounds actually were the creation of,
Mhm.
of everything. And they still are.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, we talked about this with Russell too, as you know, sounds and colors and all these qualities that, you know, what is a sound but a vibratory response, right? And as we begin to bring, you know, we talked about this, I think, in one of the O2 version of this, where he talked about how we are all a separate note, right? We all have our own distinct vibratory quality, you know, that is unique and different. But each of those notes, when brought together in soul consciousness, right, can create a great symphony, a great harmony. When we're not in alignment, right, when we're kind of all doing our own selfish, mind-driven things, what do we get? We get cacophony, right? We get just distortion. We get a song that is what we have today, for the most part. It is not harmonious. It is not glorious. It's not beautiful, right? But to get back to a beautiful song, right, a symphony, if we all begin to actually pursue soul consciousness and pursue what the soul has rather than what the mind thinking, you know, this probe that we have that is just, you know, given to itself for desire, for want and need, it will change the way that we see, and it will cause a renaissance moving forward. I don't know if we've ever really had this type of renaissance in our existence as man. Maybe in the past, you know, it won't be nirvana, I don't think, in a sense, because I think that there's always going to be struggle and strife. That's what makes man progress. But we may view the struggle and strife differently. Okay, soul 3, rule 3, soul light and body light. In these rules of magic, the laws of creative work are embodied and the means whereby man can function as an incarnate soul. So that's really all that this white magic is. I mean, we talked about it earlier, that black magic is soulless magic, where you're doing it based on what? Electric mind, sensing body, desires, selfishness, all those things that come out of the electric mind, right? And the sensing body that Walter Russell talked about. When we have the embodied soul, we are now functioning in the incarnate soul, and this is what we would determine and call white magic. Through the gradually growing synthesis of the meditation process carried on by the soul on its own plane, and that of the aspirant, the man manifest in the physical brain, a point of light which has been occultly lighted on the plane of the mind. Light ever signifies two things, energy and its manifestation in form of some kind, for light and matter are synonymous terms. Who also says that? Walter Russell, right? Light and matter are the same thing. So this is not much different from what Walter Russell said also on the science side. But what she's saying is that this light, which is occultly manifested, which we don't know how it's manifested, right? I mean, it's just occultly manifest because we're meditating, we're seeking it, right? Through this seeking, this light, this pilot light is lit in our minds, in our brain. And this light is what is going to bring forth the monad through the soul, because we're becoming incarnated. So as we have this light growing in us, we are actually beginning to commune with the monad and with the purpose. And this light is matter. So once this light is lit, we can then manifest what the creator wants. The period wherein the aspirant is us, right? Struggles to achieve that inner quiet and directed attentiveness, which will enable him to hear the voice of the silence. So as we begin this journey as aspirants or initiates or whatever we want to call ourselves, pilgrims,
Blockheads.
yeah, we're gonna struggle to hear the voice of silence because our minds are so busy, right? Our minds are so busy that we can't hear the stillness, and really, if we do, it's almost like we might become afraid because it's so quiet, right? It's so still, and we're so used to this jumble always going on in our mind. And then after that, the period wherein he habituates himself to the clear hearing and correct interpretation of the inner voice of the soul and broods reflectively upon the imparted message. So once we can actually meditate to a point of stillness, which is very difficult, I really haven't gotten there yet. I mean, I've had brief glimpses of it, and I've had brief glimpses of this inner voice. But sometimes the inner voice talks to me even though I'm busy, if I just pause, you know. But the inner voice, once that becomes clear and I begin to brood on it, which means I actually begin to, listen and begin to contemplate what it's saying to me, then I begin to create this relationship with, the spirit and with the soul in this dialogue. The interesting thing that I found as I was reading this was it talks about the ancient yoga of Atlantean days. Now, this is something I've never actually heard of before. I actually never have heard any of the people that I've heard speak about Atlantis talk that there was an ancient yoga of Atlantis, which has come down to us in the necessary fragmentary teachings of the yoga of the centers, conveys to us the information that the reflection of the Sutratma in the human organism is called the spinal cord and expresses itself in 3 nerve channels. So that picture I showed at the very beginning, that image of the spine and so on, and that was called the Sutratma. So that's the kind of the Vedic idea of the spinal cord. And through that, there's 33 vertebrae and so on. There's a lot of correlations to the 33rd degrees and things like that in the spine. It expresses itself through 3 nerve channels. Sutratma, this is the definition, the thread of spirit, the immortal ego. So here, I think you talked about this earlier, Giselle, about some people may get the immortal ego and the Jungian ego. The immortal ego is that which carries with us throughout all incarnations. It's that essence that goes with us to where we often think of the ego as the personality. So oftentimes when we think about Jungian ego, we think about ego and the personality, to where the immortal ego expressed in these terms, or the ego, I've heard also people call it the ego, is what goes with us through all incarnations. The individuality which incarnates in men one life after the other. So that's really what the Sutramatra is, and upon which are strung like beads on a string his countless personalities. The universal life supporting air, Samashti, Prau, universal energy. So as again, we have, you know, the idea of this, and this is what you were talking about a little bit today, Doug, in the chat, was that you have a Sut Matraman, right, which is this immortal ego, which goes through all of your incarnations. This is the guy who's trying to learn, or gal who's trying to learn the lessons, right? And with that, strung like a string of pearls, is all these personalities that they've had throughout those times that you can recall and remember, right? But these are epigenetics also, right? The string of personalities is the epigenetics that Bruce Lipton talks about. These are all those things that you bring in with you in each incarnation that are part of your blueprint of your genetic makeup. They are not you. You can change them. You have done these things. They make you up, right? You're made up of these things, but you do have the ability to change them through your intent once you incarnate the soul with the body. And this is what we could call karma. We could say that these things are the karma that follow us around, right? All this kind of things. But we do have the ability to change any of the things that we've done through our intention and through this learning experience, which we call Earth. Any comments on this before I move on?
I have one, but I can't remember it.
Okay. Hopefully you can connect with your soul. So rule 3 continued. These 3 are called Ida, Pingala, and the central channel, the Sushumna. When the negative and positive forces of the body, negative and positive forces of the body, who talks about that, Russell, right, which express themselves via the Ida and Pingala nerve routes, are equilibrized, the forces can ascend and descend by the central channel to and from the brain, passing through the centers up the spine without hindrance. When this is the case, we have perfect soul expression in the physical man. So the idea is that if we can get this channel working up through the spine, the Pingala and the Ida, which is the positive and negative, right? Which Walter Russell calls the radiation and the gravitation, the positive, the negative, the male, the female, hot, cold. Once we can actually get that equilibrized into equilibrium, right? Then we will have the perfect soul expression in physical man. But in order to do that, it takes work, right? It takes meditative practices. It takes getting to a place of quietness and of hearing the voice that comes forth. This will occur as the transmission of light and truth to the physical brain via the central channel of the linking Sutratma relay works out into satisfactory usefulness. Those ideas and concepts speaking in symbol, right? Those ideas and concepts speaking in symbol. Now, we've talked about this a little bit in our chat also, that this new language that we're going to have is going to be a symbolic language. And that's really this new, in the Renaissance, these ideas and concepts are going to be speaking in a symbol, which will come via the Sutratmic negative channel. So within the negative channel, we're going to have these ideas and concepts are well-meaning, but lack force and peter out into insignificance. So through the negative channel, we're kind of getting these ideas and concepts, but they lack will. So within the negative channel, what color is the negative channel from Russell? I'll give you got it. That's why it's blue, right? What is blue? What is the negative channel within Russell? I'll give you a hint.
Gravity?
Female.
Female.
The negative, remember, you can always remember that it's the negative channel because Leo Russell said she didn't like it. So because women aren't negative. So you can always remember that negative is female because Leah didn't like it. But they lack force. So they're well-meaning, right? They're weaker, they're well-meaning, but they lack the force. So what force do they need to become more incarnate?
They need the father force.
Which is what?
It's positive.
It's red. It's male, right?
It's red. From source.
Yeah, they are emotionally okay. So they are emotionally colored and lack the organized form which pure mind can give.
Pure mind, yeah.
Those which come via the opposite channel, which would be the negative channel, the positive channel, speaking figuratively, produce too rapid concretion and are motivated by the personal ambition of a ruling mentality. So this is where we kind of really get this idea. It's almost like the Venus and the Mars, right? The Venus is the blue, the Mars is red. You know, women are from Venus and men are from Mars, right? We get this controlling, motivated by personal ambition of ruling mentality, right? And that takes these forms that is being given by this negative form, right? That are weaker, that are well-intentioned, you know, and they actually come together. So the male and the female forces, the personality types, right? The archetypes of those kind of forms come together. The mind is ever egoistic, self-seeking, and expression of personal ambition, which carries within it the germ of its own destruction. So, you know, this is what you've talked about too, Doug, is that, you know, the mind is an enemy in a sense. It carries within it the germ of its own destruction. So
it's like the thing that took the bad teaching, you know.
Well, it's needed, it's necessary. Okay, so this is like when we talk a little bit about the shadow. Okay, this is a little bit of what we might call the shadow, is that it's necessary, it's needed. It has this, you know, idea that it is organized, you know, and it is a ruling mentality, right? It has this, that's what brings things into form, right? So we have the idea, and then we have the force behind it that's going to bring it into form. But within that, the mind in itself, if left alone, has a germ of its own destruction.
Well, it says there, too rapid concretion.
Mm-hmm.
That's because of that, we don't really get the best idea.
Mm-hmm.
We don't develop it well enough. Like when you said you brood on something.
Mm-hmm.
If you get this message where, oh, that's it, that's what I'm going to be doing, it's not it. Okay. Mm-hmm. It has to be vague. It has to be vague, and then by brooding on it, it's going to change form. And then so what I mean is, if you get this message and it comes down, that's it. Eventually, yeah, you'll go that route, mm-hmm. but it's going to fail. Because it's that mind, egotistic, self-seeking. It's, you know, that's it. I'm supposed to be, you know, leading this, whatever, you know. But yeah, the ideas that come from the formless world is usually very vague, and it takes, well, or you know, just that's the part they're talking about there. I mean, germ of its own destruction. I can see that. Mm-hmm. Well, we just see it in our own lives, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ukraine also.
This is part of our life right now.
Yeah.
The period wherein the sounds the sacred word, which is the Om, and blending it with the voice of the ego or soul, sets it in motion, mental matter for the building of his thought form. It is the man of the physical plane who now sounds the word, and he does it in 4 ways. So what it's saying here, that as we are in our meditative state, right, as we are getting the word from source, right, as we are beginning to understand and get a message, and we're brooding on the message, then we begin to chant the sacred word, right? Because now what we're doing is we're actually manifesting, right? We're putting this, just as in the Bible where it says, you know, in the beginning was the word, and the word was God, and the word was with God, right? The word is going to go forth and create the mental matter for the building of his thought form. So again, you know, I think, Doug, you said where, you know, every thought becomes, you know, reality or whatever. I don't think that's totally true. Like I said, what's being explained here is that some thought forms don't have the inertia, right, to actually become into reality. Some are going to become self-destructive and destroy themselves before they ever make it into reality. But some may get out. And the ones that we talk about, so when we have a thought form, like say if we get into an argument, we become very angry, and I'm going to kill you, and you actually say it and think it, right? This becomes a much greater reality of a thought form. It's one thing just to think it, but in order to say it, you have to think it also, right? So so within this is saying the positive way is, instead of like saying and things in anger or that you regret, when you bring those thought forms in, when you bring the ideas into the brain and you begin to brood on those, and you hear this small voice, and then you speak that through the Om, and you add the resonance to it, then that becomes a much more stable thought form. So first of all, he says the word, that he becomes the word. He sounds the word within himself, seeking to do so as the soul. He sounds the word literally on the physical plane, thus affecting the 3 grades of matter in his environment. And he carries forward, and this is the most difficult stage, a paralleling activity of a steady visualization of the form through which he hopes to express that aspect of the plan which he has contacted and which he hopes to bring into active being through his own life and his own environment. So as I said, this is the how, at least this is how Bailey's saying the how works. By connecting with the monad, connecting with the higher source, to go into meditation, and we're going to cover these at the end here. But does anybody have any questions so far about what we're talking about here, or comments?
It's connected to the mind, but also I think when the mind can play both roles. I mean, you just think you're it, but it's playing both sides of it.
Yeah, and that's the positive and the negative that we're talking about here. But again,
no, I'm like tricking you in the sense that it's talking and you're like thinking you're answering it, but in reality and then there's another answer. So it's like playing both sides.
Well, again, I think that when you're in your electric mind, that's very much the case. Okay, I think, but that's the whole thing that we're trying to say here, and what Walter Russell was trying to say is we have to get out of that thinking mind. I mean, if you have to get to a place of quietness and stillness, and actually be getting single truth and when you get a single truth and a single source, it's much more difficult to have that duality that you're talking about. But like I said, I've never really experienced this total, what I think is synchronistic heart mind coherence, which is aligned with soul and getting a voice and then trying to bring that in. So it's, to me, it's like I said, I've tried it. I mean, I've tried meditation many times. I do it. But to actually come into a stillness and synchronic coherence, it's a very difficult thing to do, I think. And the world's not made for us to do that today. It's trying to keep us so busy, right? And so confused with so much. I mean, as I said earlier, that, a lot of this energy is information, but how much information do you need to make a decision? We're bombarded with so much information. I think the funny thing is today, when I talk to younger people, like millennials, they have so much information, but they don't really bring it into being because they're overloaded. It's kind of like an analysis paralysis. It's trying to drive a parked car, right? They have so much information that they can't parse it because they haven't really been taught an algorithm of discernment. And that algorithm of discernment is not something that's really can be taught. It has to be given. It has to be downloaded from source. And so they may, anybody may seek to find the algorithm of discernment, but the algorithm of discernment is really source or divine. And the only way I can receive that is through meditation, quiet. Any comments before we move on?
Yeah, it's just that the more we can be quiet, once in, when we can, then our mind can be impressed. Like we might not realize it. Something goes there. We don't have to hear it. It'll grow in the consciousness eventually. Yeah, it's just to quiet our bodies, like the physical, mental, and emotional, like those three, so that we can, and I like when it says he sounds the word within himself, when you get this thing where you're trying to quiet and it's moving, you just sound the Om silently,
Mhm.
and it will dissipate. And then when we finish, so it's never longer than 20 minutes in total, like a
Mhm.
guided.
Mhm.
At the end, we will say it physically, a three Om,
Mhm.
for example. And that talks about the grades of matter. But yeah, it's it's not something that we learned when we were young, or it's
Nobody
too
could
bad
teach
that
it.
they
They
don't
didn't know
show
it.
us how to meditate even like in elementary, you know.
Mhm.
Well, going into nature and all these things, communing with nature is a type of,
Mhm.
of quietness for sure.
You're muted, Doug.
Mm. We can hear you.
There you
Yes.
go.
Walking meditation.
Mhm.
I mean, a lot of people have suggested to me that, just going out in nature, and
Mhm.
you don't have to be sitting with with your circle, but
Mhm.
that you're meditating.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah,
go out in the-
whatever works. I mean, again, this is one method, right? But there is a practice that we're talking about here, where we're actually, as we're walking, right, we're beginning to, whatever it is. If it's as you're walking, you become one with your surroundings, right, and you actually begin to be one and feel, and actually begin to get the whole purpose is to get the voice, right, to get a message, to not just to become peaceful, right, not just to have a good feeling, but it's actually to communicate. This is the purpose of this meditation, is that and whatever that looks like to you, if when you're walking in nature, you feel like you're communicating with your source or your higher purpose, and that's communicating with you, then that's what we're trying to get at with white magic. Now, to walk and just to decompress, yeah, is it beneficial? Sure. But is it going to get you to your goal of finding your purpose in life and on this earth? That's another question. So I think to actually get to those levels, and I could be wrong, I'm not saying I'm not, right? But to get to those levels to where we actually begin to commune with source and divine purpose, it takes a little bit more active participation. Any comments on that, what I just said regarding active participation?
I guess I'm thinking out. I'm familiar with certain methodologies, such as the Self-Realization Fellowship, which was the lessons put forth by Paramahansa Yogananda,
Mm-hmm.
and that's exactly what he's in three lessons is very precise methods of meditation,
Mhm.
and for the express purpose of having a knowing relationship, experienced relationship with the one and
Mhm.
source, God. And so yeah, I'm familiar with that, and that's just my comment. That I know there's other methodologies too, and of course Kundalini specific meditations as well. But yeah, that's resonating with me, that it's more than just sitting with yourself. Actually, the other thing that resonated with me earlier that was cool is I actually address my higher self in my daily meditation.
Mhm.
But I really don't go any further than that. It's actually, I've tried more precise meditation methods, but the thing that I've had the most success with and the most I think so far is just emptying my mind of thought, and knowing that I'm doing that in alignment with my higher self, and addressing that higher self directly. But yeah, so there probably is more to this, and that's kind of a discipline I think I've lacked personally.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Before we move on. Okay, so I think at 6 o'clock, I think that we'll save this. We're going to get into the fourth ray, the 7 rays, but I really want to spend some greater time on this before. So I think we're going to call this. We're going to stop here at the 7 rays. So Giselle, next week you can discuss the 7 rays a little bit more, and we'll talk about Rule 3 and Rule 4 next week. We'll continue with Rule 3 and Rule 4, and we'll get into the 7 rays because I think that Dr. Bear is going to discuss the 7 rays in detail, isn't he, on Alpha Vedic a little bit? I know he said he used that in his practice. And so we'll, again, I'm not trying to do anything here that's real deep. I'm kind of just cover a lot of topics just to get people introduced to it. Because this would be a very intense study if we got real deep into it. Right now, we're kind of just, skimming across the surface, touching a lot of aspects of it to keep it moving, but we may visit it later. But for this week, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for joining me. We will be back again next week. I think we're going to take a break because Music and Sky starts the following week. So I'll probably take a 2-week hiatus after next week. And again, for all those who are watching, hopefully you're getting something from this. Please like and subscribe. This is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the Rogue River with the Walter Russell Secret of Light group. Thank you, and we'll see you next week when all is well.